Alumni Leadership Lecture Series. Our speaker today is Russ, Arun from the 1980 batch. He's a BTech Mechanical Engineering 1980. He's now the GM of Bing Search and Advertising at Microsoft India Development Center. He has an MBA from UCLA and an MS from Syracuse University. Before Microsoft, he was a development manager at Sun Microsystems, working on Windows and networking products. And before he became general manager for Bing Search and Advertising, he was the partner group program manager for display ads and then search ads in the online services division. We're very happy to have Russ here as our speaker today. Of course, he's 1 year my senior, so he probably ragged me when I was a student here. But luckily, all these memories fade after a while. So I invite Russ.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you don't get feedback from that mic. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is, as I know, I've been known in IIT. My name is RV Arun. They call me RV here, all my batchmates here. Somewhere along the lines, my name morphed, but I won't get into it. I run what is called the India Development Center, which is both in Bangalore and in Hyderabad. And it's the online services division. I'll talk a little more about it toward the end. But first, I think I won't spend too much time on this slide. I don't know whether you can read any of this from the back. Can any of you read it? Oh boy, that's going to be interesting. So anyway, I'll try to read. What's that?
It may help if the house lights are off.
I don't know how well that's going to work. But anyway, so somebody will work on that. Anyway, as I pointed out, I studied here in Ganga Hostel. I don't know, my room number was 357, was it, if I remember correctly? But I noticed that the numbers might have changed since that time. Did my MBA much later. I went to master's directly from here and then did my MBA much later. Worked Sun Microsystems. It was I worked in a bunch of startups. One of them got acquired by Sun. I was a Unix bigot. I used to be a kernel developer. How many of you are computer science majors here? A few, right? So all the things you probably read about page tables, demand paging, all that stuff, well, it's real stuff. I actually wrote some of that code. It was scary. About a few years back, I went and looked at a Unix source code, and some of the old code I wrote is still there, which is scary as hell. I also wrote some of what is the very first DOS box. I don't know whether you know what a DOS box is. When you type command, even in Windows, that black box that shows up was in Windows, was on Unix as well. So then I joined Microsoft in 1992. I'll spend a little bit of time on that later, so I won't spend much time there. But one thing I'll tell you was multiple times I did not want to join Microsoft because, hey, Unix was the place to be. I was writing code on Unix, and it was a fun place to be. Later on, I joined Microsoft, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. From an agenda perspective, I have a bunch of preachy tidbits. I'll try to stop, not spend too much time on that. I have lessons mostly from my experience, so I'll tell you a couple of incidents while I was working on and derive lessons from them. Frankly, those two don't hang together, so I'll do my best to connect the both of them together. And in the end, we'll have some Microsoft trivia. So, and for those of you who answer, we have T-shirts and some water bottles and stuff like that. So we'll see how well we do there. The theme is very simple. I want to spend a couple of slides talking about what I think school is about, which might be slightly different from what you think school is about. And then in the first few years after you start work, then I'll jump into what I did and lessons I learned along the way. So hopefully along this, you'll learn lessons and tidbits of stuff that you want to use as you are in school, as well as the first few jobs that you have after school. By the way, I use school like I do in the US, unfortunately. I do mean college. So if I say school, just translate that into college. I apologize for that. I'm glad I at least wrote it on the slide. That was a reminder. I'd forgotten I have that usage these days. The main thing I want to impress upon you is in college, you learn to learn. A lot of you think that this is the begin all and end all. Well, that's not what happens. You really are learning in a lot of ways on how to learn. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. All the companies you see on the right-hand side, did not exist when we all went to school. Those are all new companies that were created since we went to school, so we couldn't have learned anything about them. And a bunch of the things like iPhone and iPad and Android devices you're running around, and Surface, if you've heard of it from Microsoft, are all devices that have been probably here since you were born. So the world is changing very, very fast, if you will. So the only thing that is constant in this world is change itself. So, if there is one thing you can learn while you are at school is how to embrace change, because the best thing you can do is to convert change into an opportunity, if you will, and not run away from it. And change is it's an amazing equalizer, especially if it's what is called a frame-breaking change. A frame-breaking change is one where something new out of the blue comes and happens. Search is a classic example. Microsoft was doing well. We slept at the wheel for a few days, and then Google took over search, and it's a very viable company. Things like that have happened a lot of times. Kodak was awesome in film, and then everything went into digital cameras and stuff like that, and then now Kodak is almost no more, and all the stuff that they did. So whenever there is change, change is an opportunity, and it's actually, from the industry we are in, it's one of the funnest things that you can have. Change happens all the time. As long as you embrace change, I think you will do very well. So what are you learning if you're going to go to school? You're learning foundation in stuff, foundation in things that you can build upon when you go. The other thing you learn is the ability to learn itself, because quite often when you're doing projects and your professors are not giving you enough information, it is meant for you to stretch and for you to expand your thinking a lot more than what the books are giving you. So don't take those lightly. Those are more fun than then regurgitating what you have on textbooks. So to the extent that you can work on that, please do. And the confidence in picking up new information. Quite often, a lot of stuff that we are all working on today was stuff that did not exist before. All of that stuff we picked up as we went along. So you're learning quite often stuff on how, and basically the confidence in picking up new stuff and adapting to new worlds. You also learn a bunch of bad stuff. While you're in IT, you might learn arrogance and attitude and stuff like that, things that you should leave at home. But otherwise, just think of school as a place where you're learning to learn at this point in time. The first job is an interesting thing. A lot of you will probably be in a job in about 2 to 4 years, depending upon where you are in your life. And the professional learning in your first job is probably one of the most amazing times. One of the things that breaks my heart is kids come from school and they somehow just slack. They think, oh my God, I've just done a hard 4 years. Now is not the time to slack. This is the time where you should be a sponge and soaking things up. There is about 10% to 20% of the kids that we actually fire, mostly because they just come and just slack and don't do stuff. And that's not what you want to be. And usually, when you go to a school like IIT, that's not in your DNA, if you will. But that's something you should just watch out for. But more importantly, forgetting whether what the company does, that is the time about the maximum learning you have. Because a lot of what you learned in school, you're applying for the first time and pushing boundaries. And about 3 to 5 years from out of school, you're probably one of the most recruitable person around. I'll give you an example from my own history. When I graduated from my master's, it was actually a depressing time in the US. Swami here probably got a job, but a lot of us were having trouble. I can tell you I sent out about 120 resumes at that time, got 2 interviews and 1 job, and that was the only job I had in 1982. 4 years later, every job I applied, I got. I applied to Microsoft, I applied to 3Com, which invented Ethernet, anything. Any job I'd offered, I'd gotten mostly based on the work that I had done in the last 4 years. People really didn't care where I went to school, what I did. They only cared about what I'd done in the last few years. So that's kind of important, that you don't slack and you actually seize the opportunity in the first few years and you learn a lot, because you are going to be in the industry, you are going to be pushed in a lot of ways, and you should embrace that as much as you can. The other thing, if you're lucky, and I think I was lucky in some way, is to work on something you're passionate about. Because when you are working on something you're passionate about, work ceases to be work. It becomes as much fun. I live in an area where Boeing exists. And it's so funny that these guys sit there and build planes all day, And in the evenings, they come and build model airplanes, and right near our house is a model airplane field, and these guys are flying these planes. I mean, that is passion where their hobby, their work, everything is the same thing. I don't know whether you need to go to that kind of an extreme, but once you find your passion, then you don't think of work as work, if you will. And there are two simple ways to make progress once you get into the workforce. One is to try a bunch of new things, and that I've done that a bit in my life, and that is where you're rounding out your skills and experiences. The one thing about that is you are more adaptable. Any new technology, anything that comes your way, and you have a lot more breadth. By definition, you don't have a lot of depth. So in theory, you can be more easily replaced, if you will, but that's not the reason for you to do the wrong thing. You got to do what you feel is right. Or you can spend a lot of time in one specific area, in which case you become an expert in that area. The advantage of being an expert is it's very hard to replace you as long as what you're working on is important. But if you're working on the chemical industry and digital cameras come and suddenly you have this thing, then chemical films, you become extinct in a hurry, right? So that's the yin and the yang, and there is no good right or wrong answer. You've got to find what is important for you. So I'll just talk a little bit about my years. I talk only about this part I did at Microsoft. I joined Microsoft way early in 1992. And I have worked on tons and tons of projects in Microsoft. Every 3 to 4 years, I've changed almost complete divisions. One of the advantages we have at Microsoft is you can work on totally different areas while being in the same company. But that is not true for everyone. There are people who have been in Windows, who've been in databases, who've been there for 10, 15 years. So whatever floats your boat is what's more important. One of the first projects I worked on is Windows 95, and I'm going to talk to you about two simple incidents that happened there, just to illustrate the point. How many of you use Windows of any sort on a laptop, desktop? Okay, glad. How many of you noticed that there is actually a Windows flag at the bottom and a taskbar, right? So you've all used that. You'll be surprised to know that was actually invented by an MIT intern when we were working on Windows 95. That's the first time we actually introduced that. So he came up with two different ideas, that every application you launch actually will be in the taskbar, but it'll be completely maximized. He thought novice users won't understand Windows and all of that, and you switch between application by just touching on the taskbar. Guess what? With touch and all of that, that's where we are going, probably long time, 20, 25 years after he thought about it, right? What we chose was the other option he had, which is anytime you used anything from Windows 95, Windows XP, Vista, Windows 7, that interface basically was invented by that kid. Around that same era, there was another kid who worked there called Ron Radko. And I used to be a program manager for what is called kernel and file systems, which is the bottom half of Windows. He came running into my office one day. Probably he's been out 3-4 months out of college, right? So this kid comes and says, I have this idea. If you put a CD into the CD player, this thing's automatically going to do something. And in those days, it was a disaster. You would put the CD, you'll have to find the drive, you'll double click on it, and you have to know what the name of the file you run it is. It's either called run or setup or whatever it is. It was a disaster. His idea was you'd automatically put the thing and do the right thing. I said, good idea, but I'll think about it, right? So I thought about it, and I could only see so many problems with it. At that time, Sony had 50% of the CD market. For those of you who are computer science majors, the Sony CD was not interrupt driven. And translating that to the others, that essentially means when you put a CD in the drive, it did not tell you there was a CD in the drive. So you had to do what is called polling, to use a